Have you ever stood among ancient ruins and felt the weight of history around you? Maybe you've walked through the Roman Forum, gazed up at the pyramids of Giza, or even explored the mossy stones of Angkor Wat. It's easy to imagine these places as frozen in time, monuments to a single moment in history. But what if I told you that beneath your feet, hidden under layers of earth and centuries of stories, lie entire cities that have been completely forgotten? These aren't just lost neighborhoods or buried streets. We're talking about vast, thriving metropolises swallowed by time, waiting silently below the world's most famous archaeological sites. And the most incredible part, we're finding them now not by accident, but because of seemingly ordinary objects most people would overlook: discarded foundation stones. You might think of them as just rocks, broken pieces of ancient construction, but these stones are so much more. They're time capsules, silent witnesses. They carry inscriptions, symbols, and clues that point us toward civilizations that history books barely mention. From the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia to the misty highlands of Peru, these foundation stones are rewriting the story of human civilization, one discovery at a time. In this video, we're going to explore 22 of these forgotten stones, each one a key that unlocks a door to a ghost city buried beneath ruins we thought we knew. We'll travel from the Palatine Hill in Rome to the jungles of Cambodia, from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to the Andes Mountains. You'll see how a single stone, tossed aside and reused centuries later, can reveal the presence of a lost world. This isn't just about archaeology, it's about rediscovering our past, challenging long-held myths, and marveling at how layers of human ambition, tragedy, and triumph are literally stacked one upon the other. So come with me, let's dig deeper and listen to what these stones have been waiting to tell us. Think of the most important stone in a building, not the fancy one on top, but the very first one set into the earth. Ancient builders saw this foundation stone as far more than just a piece of rock. It was the sacred anchor for everything that would rise above it. Across countless cultures, the act of laying this stone was a deeply spiritual ceremony. It was often blessed, anointed with oils, or even accompanied by offerings to the gods, intended to forge a permanent link between the earthly realm and the divine. This stone was believed to hold the spiritual blueprint of the entire structure, a permanent prayer etched into the ground. Because of this profound significance, these stones were frequently inscribed with crucial information. A king might have his name and titles carved into it, a temple might state the deity it was dedicated to, or a civic building might record the year it was founded. In Mesopotamia, for example, these inscriptions were meticulously pressed into the clay using cuneiform script, creating a permanent record that could detail everything from royal lineages to the specific purpose of the building. These weren't vanity projects, they were meant for the eyes of the gods and for future generations, a declaration of identity and intention meant to last for eternity. This is what makes a discarded foundation stone such an incredible find for archaeologists. When a conquering army raises a city or a new civilization builds directly on top of an old one, they often didn't just haul away every single stone. It was common practice to reuse what was already there, pulling apart the old structures to build the new. A foundational block, heavy and seemingly plain, might be pulled from its sacred resting place and tossed into a wall or used as simple fill in a later construction project. The original builders would be horrified, but for us, this act of careless recycling created an accidental time capsule. That reused stone, now out of context and hidden within a wall that might be centuries younger, carries its original message like a secret. An archaeologist who finds a block with strange markings in a Roman wall might suddenly realize it's actually Etruscan. A stone with faded glyphs in a Mayan temple could turn out to be from a much older, completely different culture. These stones become historical breadcrumbs. They are the clues that whisper something much older is buried here. By following the trail of these discarded, sacred stones, we don't just learn about a single building, we often find the roadmap to an entire lost world hidden directly beneath our feet. So how does a bustling, vibrant city simply vanish, only to be built over and forgotten? The formation of these ghost cities is a story written not in sudden erasure, but in gradual layers of change, disaster, and human ambition. Imagine a thriving port city at the mouth of a great river. For generations, it flourishes as a hub of trade, but that very river, the source of its life, also carries immense amounts of silt. Season after season, century after century, the river floods its banks, depositing a thin, relentless layer of mud and sediment. With each flood, the ground level of the city rises slightly. Eventually, a major flood might be catastrophic enough to force a temporary abandonment. When people return, they don't excavate. They simply build new floors and new foundations right on top of the mud, effectively burying the old city beneath their feet. This slow geological process has sealed countless ancient settlements, particularly in regions like Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, where rivers were both the lifeblood and the eventual shroud of early urban centers. Then there are the sudden, violent cataclysms. A volcano erupts with unimaginable force, as Mount Vesuvius did in 79 CE, encasing the Roman city of Pompeii in a deep, preserving tomb of volcanic ash and pumice. An earthquake can level a city in minutes, and rather than clear the massive rubble, a new settlement might simply spread a layer of earth over the destruction and start again. War is another brutal architect of ghost cities. A city is sacked, burned, and razed by a conquering army. The survivors flee or are enslaved. For a time, the area is abandoned, a haunted place of ruins. But its strategic location, perhaps on a hilltop, by a river crossing, or along a trade route, remains valuable. Years or even centuries later, new people arrive. They see the scattered stones of the old fortifications as a convenient quarry. They clear just enough space to build their own homes, using the rubble of the past as the foundation for their future. Completely unaware they are constructing their new city directly atop the ghost of the old one. This cyclical process creates what archaeologists call a tell or a mound, a small, artificial hill that, when excavated, reveals itself not as a single site, but as a layer cake of civilizations. The most famous example is the ancient city of Troy. We often speak of it as one place, but in reality, it's at least 9 different cities, each constructed directly on the ruins of its predecessor. There's Troy I, a small early settlement, then Troy II, larger and richer, which was destroyed by fire, then Troy III, IV, V, and VI, each rebuilding and expanding. The legendary Trojan War of Homer's Iliad is associated with Troy VII. Then came Troy VIII, a Greek and Roman city, and finally Troy IX from the Byzantine era. Each generation lived on a hill that was, in fact, the accumulated debris and foundations of all who came before them. Their everyday ground level was the rooftop of a much older world. Over time, the memory of these deepest layers fades into myth and then into complete oblivion. The knowledge that an even older city lies below is lost. The site becomes known only for its most recent, visible ruins. That is, until a clue emerges, often something as humble as a single discarded foundation stone found out of place. This stone, with its strange, archaic inscription, acts like a secret message from the past. It's the thread that, when pulled by a curious archaeologist, begins to unravel the entire layered tapestry. It points excavators downward, suggesting that the true treasure isn't just what's on the surface, but the entire hidden archive of human history lying in strata beneath. This process of urban layering is known as a palimpsest, a term borrowed from ancient manuscripts where old text was scraped off and written over, but where faint traces of the original writing remain. Our most famous ruins are not single chapters in a history book. They are entire libraries stacked floor upon floor, waiting for the right key to unlock their deepest stories. Now let's travel to the very heart of the Roman Empire, where our first incredible discovery was made. High atop the Palatine Hill, the site revered by ancient Romans as the place where the she-wolf suckled the infant twins Romulus and Remus, archaeologists were carefully examining a section of an imperial-era retaining wall. To the untrained eye, it was just a wall, a jumble of bricks and stone, but one block stood out. It was a piece of travertine, a type of limestone common in Roman construction, but this particular stone had clearly been reused. It didn't fit perfectly. It was a square peg in a round hole, salvaged from some older, forgotten structure and pressed into service for this new project. Upon closer inspection, the surface of that stone revealed a faint but incredible inscription. It referenced the festival of Septimontium. For most people, that name wouldn't ring a bell, but for historians, it was a thunderclap. The Septimontium was a very ancient festival, one that predates the traditional founding of Rome in 753 BCE by centuries. This festival was not celebrated by a unified Roman people, but by a league of separate villages living on 7 different hills. The inscription on this discarded block was a direct message from a time before Rome was Rome. It was evidence that the Palatine Hill was not originally the symbolic center of a great empire, but was instead just one independent settlement among several, part of a loose coalition known as the Septimontium League. This single, reused stone became the key that unlocked a door to a ghost city. It told archaeologists exactly what to look for and where to dig. Following this clue, excavations on the Palatine began to go deeper, pushing past the foundations of imperial palaces and republican temples. And there, buried beneath layers of later construction, they found the remains of hut foundations, post holes, and simple pottery fragments dating all the way back to the 9th century BCE. These were the physical traces of a small Iron Age village, a community of farmers and shepherds who lived on that hilltop over 2,800 years ago, a full century before the legendary date of Rome's founding. This discovery fundamentally challenges the mythic story we all think we know. The tale of Romulus and Remus is a powerful founding legend, but it presents Rome as a city that sprang into being almost overnight, fully formed from the will of its first king. The reality, as revealed by this ghost city beneath the Palatine, is far more fascinating and complex. Rome wasn't born in a day. It began as a scattered collection of small hilltop villages that, over hundreds of years, gradually grew together, merged, and eventually formed the nucleus of the city we know. The legendary founding was likely just a pivotal moment of political unification, a symbolic event that cemented the merger of these pre-existing communities. That one travertine block, carelessly tossed into a new wall, forced us to rewrite the earliest chapters of one of history's greatest empires, proving that even the most iconic stories are built upon layers of forgotten truth. Now, let's journey to another cradle of Western civilization, Athens, a city synonymous with the birth of democracy, philosophy, and art. We picture the classical agora as it was in its 5th century BCE glory, a bustling public square where Socrates engaged in dialogue, where citizens debated the laws of the city, and where the very idea of self-governance was nurtured. But the discovery of a single, repurposed marble block in this very space revealed that this celebrated center of Athenian life was itself built upon the ghost of an even older, forgotten civic heart. During excavations in the 1930s, archaeologists working in the northern part of the Agora made a startling find. Embedded in the foundation of a much later Hellenistic building, they uncovered a large marble stone that clearly did not belong. It was a foundation block, and it was inscribed with a series of laws. The style of the writing and the language used pointed to a much earlier era, the 6th century BCE, a time of great social upheaval in Athens. The laws were attributed to none other than Solon, the famed lawmaker and poet who laid the groundwork for Athenian democracy by restructuring society and creating a more just legal code. This stone was a sacred object, once the anchor of a significant public building, likely a law court or a council chamber. Yet here it was, centuries later, stripped of its original purpose and used as mere construction filler. This discarded stone was a powerful clue. It suggested that the classical agora, the one we know from history books, was actually a replacement. The original civic center, now called the Old Agora, had been located elsewhere, possibly to the east near the Acropolis. Historians now believe this older center was severely damaged or even deliberately destroyed by the invading Persian army in 480 BCE during their sack of Athens. When the Athenians returned to their ruined city, they didn't just rebuild what was lost. They reimagined their public space. They moved the civic heart of the city to a new, flatter area northwest of the Acropolis and constructed the new, grander agora we recognize today. In their haste and pragmatism, they scavenged materials from the old, destroyed buildings, including this inscribed foundation stone from Solon's time, and used them to build their new future, inadvertently burying the evidence of their own earlier beginnings. Guided by this incredible find, archaeologists shifted their focus. They began looking for traces of this lost old agora, and their efforts were rewarded. They uncovered the remains of pre-classical structures, including a simple, archaic period building identified as a primitive bouleuterion, a council house where a governing body of citizens would have met. This structure was far humbler than the elaborate buildings that would follow, but its existence is monumental. It shows us that the democratic experiment didn't appear out of nowhere in the 5th century. It was an evolution. The ideas of civic participation, of councils and assemblies, were already being tested and developed generations before the golden age of Pericles. This ghost city beneath Athens tells a story of iterative development, of a society that learned from disaster and constantly refined its vision of itself. The classical agora wasn't a spontaneous creation. It was a conscious improvement upon a previous model, built literally and figuratively on the foundations of the past. That one discarded stone, inscribed with the laws of a reformer, became a direct link between two different eras of Athenian life, proving that even democracy itself has layers, each one built upon the lessons and the rubble of what came before. But the story doesn't just stay in the classical world. Now, let's travel across the Atlantic to the vast highlands of central Mexico, to one of the most awe-inspiring sites in the Americas, Teotihuacan. For centuries, this sprawling ancient city, with its massive pyramid of the sun and moon and its grand avenue of the dead, has been shrouded in mystery. We don't even know what the people who built it called themselves. The name Teotihuacan, meaning the place where the gods were created, was given to it centuries later by the Aztecs, who stumbled upon its magnificent ruins and believed it was the work of giants. For a long time, archaeologists thought of it as a singular, explosive phenomenon, a brilliant city that appeared around the 1st century CE and dominated the region for hundreds of years. But a curious discovery deep within its largest monument began to unravel that simple story. During restoration work on the Pyramid of the Sun in the early 20th century, workers unearthed a strange stone slab embedded within the pyramid's core, far from any visible surface. It wasn't part of the main construction. It seemed to have been sealed inside deliberately, a hidden relic within the mountain of stone. This slab, made of volcanic rock, was unlike the other stones around it. Most importantly, it was carved with a series of glyphs and symbols, but these markings weren't in the classic Teotihuacan style that we see on the city's later murals and pottery. The symbols were more archaic, more crude, and they bore a striking resemblance to the writing systems of much older cultures from the region, possibly the Otomi people, or even the enigmatic Tila civilization that flourished centuries before Teotihuacan's rise. This single hidden stone was a bombshell. It suggested that the Pyramid of the Sun, the very heart and symbol of Teotihuacan's power, was not the first structure to occupy this sacred spot. The builders of the pyramid, it seemed, had found something already there, an older temple, a monument, or perhaps just this very stone, and they had deliberately incorporated it into the foundation of their new, colossal project. They were building directly on top of, and in reverence to, a much older holy site. This wasn't just a city built on empty land. It was a city constructed atop the ghost of a predecessor, a place that was already considered spiritually powerful long before the first stones of the Great Pyramids were ever laid. Armed with this clue, archaeologists turned to modern technology to peer beneath the surface without digging. They used infrared scanners and ground-penetrating radar to map the subsurface around the Pyramid of the Sun. The results were staggering. The scans revealed the clear outlines of structures, the foundations of buildings, the layout of plazas, and the pathways of streets that were completely different in orientation from the grid of the later Teotihuacan. These ghostly shapes were buried deep, dating back to at least 100 BCE, a full century before Teotihuacan's famous era. Targeted excavations confirmed it, unearthing pottery shards, simple clay figurines, and ritual objects from this earlier period, artifacts that belong to a culture we are only just beginning to understand. This discovery forces us to completely reshape our understanding of Mesoamerican history. Teotihuacan was not an isolated miracle. Its breathtaking urban plan, its sophisticated cosmology, and its immense spiritual authority did not spring from a vacuum. They were built upon the foundations, both literal and cultural, of an earlier civilization. The alignment of the Avenue of the Dead with celestial events, the placement of the pyramids, these may have been refinements of an older sacred blueprint. The people of Teotihuacan likely saw themselves not as inventors, but as inheritors and amplifiers of a sacred tradition that began long before them. They were consciously building upon the sacred spaces of their predecessors, physically and spiritually anchoring their new metropolis to the ancient power of the past. This ghost city beneath Teotihuacan reveals a deep cultural continuity in ancient Mexico, a story of civilizations layering upon each other, each new generation honoring the old gods even as they built monuments to their own. Our journey now takes us to one of the most contested and spiritually charged pieces of real estate on Earth, Jerusalem's Temple Mount. This plateau, sacred to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, has been built, destroyed, and rebuilt for millennia. It's a place where every stone seems to whisper of faith, conflict, and history. And it was here, during repairs to a retaining wall built by King Herod the Great 2,000 years ago, that a seemingly ordinary block of limestone revealed a secret that reached back to a time before kings, before temples, before the city was even called Jerusalem. This particular stone was part of the massive Herodian construction, but it stood out to the sharp-eyed archaeologists examining the site. While the other blocks were typical of the finely cut, smooth style Herod's engineers were famous for, this one was different. It was rougher, older, and it had clearly been quarried and shaped using much more ancient techniques. Most importantly, it bore faint but distinct markings carved into its surface markings in a style associated with the Phoenicians, the master seafarers and builders of the ancient world. This was a puzzle. Phoenician-style stonework had no place in a purely Herodian, Judean wall. The only logical explanation was that this block was not original to Herod's project. It was spolia, a piece of stone scavenged from a ruined, older structure and reused as simple fill in the new, grander construction. This block was an orphan from a much older world, a ghost from a city that had vanished long before Herod was even born. The style of the markings provided the crucial clue to its origin. The Phoenician connection pointed directly to the Jebusites, a Canaanite people who inhabited the hilltop citadel of Jebus, also known as Zion, centuries before the Israelite king David famously conquered it. According to the biblical narrative, David's general Joab managed to infiltrate the city through a water shaft leading to its capture. This stone, with its pre-Israelite markings, was a stunning piece of tangible evidence. It suggested that Herod's builders, while leveling ground and digging foundations for their enormous temple platform, had inadvertently unearthed the remnants of that very Jebusite stronghold. Rather than haul the old rubble away, they did what builders have always done. They used it. They tossed this sacred relic from a conquered people into the base of a new wall, symbolically and literally building their own future upon the defeated past. This single discarded block became a roadmap for archaeologists, pointing them toward the existence of a ghost city buried deep beneath the later Jewish and Roman constructions. If this stone was down here, the logic went, then the structure it came from must be even deeper. Following this trail, archaeologists began to focus their investigations on the areas around the Temple Mount's base. Their work, often conducted in cramped tunnels and carefully dug shafts, has revealed an astonishingly complex underground world. They have uncovered massive fortification walls from the Middle Bronze Age, dating back nearly 4,000 years, walls that would have been formidable enough to make David's conquest a legendary feat. Even more dramatic was the discovery of incredibly sophisticated water systems, including the famous Warren Shaft, a deep, vertical tunnel that likely allowed the Jebusites to access a secure water source from within their city walls during a siege. This complex engineering project aligns perfectly with the biblical account of a city captured through its water system. These findings do more than just confirm a story from the Bible. They add profound, tangible depth to it. They reveal Jerusalem not as a city that began with King David, but as a powerful and well-fortified urban center for centuries prior. The Jebusite ghost city of Zion was not some primitive village. It was a formidable Canaanite citadel with advanced engineering and monumental architecture. The Israelite kings didn't build their capital from scratch. They took a pre-existing, strategically brilliant stronghold and made it their own, building their temple and palaces directly atop the foundations of the previous rulers. This pattern of construction, layering the new sacred directly over the old, defines Jerusalem's entire history. The Jebusites built on a holy site. The Israelites built the first temple on that. The Babylonians destroyed it. The returning exiles built the second temple. Herod expanded it into a marvel of the ancient world. The Romans raised it, and later Muslim rulers built the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque atop the same foundation stone. This makes Jerusalem the ultimate perpetual city, a place where every empire and every faith has sought to anchor its legitimacy by physically connecting to the layers of history beneath it. That one Phoenician-marked stone carelessly tossed into a wall is a perfect metaphor for the city itself, a place where the present is forever built upon the ghosts of the past, each layer a chapter in an endless, unfolding story of human belief and ambition. Back in the very heart of ancient Rome, the Forum was the bustling center of the world, a place of grand speeches, solemn rituals, and the relentless machinery of an empire. We think of it as purely, quintessentially Roman, but right there, embedded in the foundation of one of its most important temples, lay a stone that whispered a very different, much older story. The Temple of Saturn, with its iconic columns holding up the sky, was a symbol of Rome's wealth and stability. Yet during excavations in the late 19th century, archaeologists made a curious discovery at its base. Among the perfectly cut blocks of Roman tufa was one that stood out. It was rougher, darker, and clearly much older, and most tellingly, its surface was inscribed with a series of angular, unfamiliar characters, the script of the Etruscans. This was not just any old rock, it was a foundational block, the kind the Etruscans used to sanctify their own temples and important buildings. The inscription on it, though faded, was a dedication, likely to a god whose name was lost to time. The sheer presence of this Etruscan stone in the heart of the Roman Forum was a historical bombshell. It could only mean one thing: this sacred block had been ripped from its original home in an Etruscan structure and unceremoniously reused as mere rubble fill in the foundation of the newer Roman temple. It was an act of pragmatic recycling, but also a powerful symbolic gesture, the new order literally building its foundations upon the dismantled pieces of the old. This single discarded stone became a crucial clue, pointing archaeologists toward a truth that written histories had largely ignored. The Roman legends spoke of 7 kings, and the last 3 were said to be Etruscan. But this stone suggested their influence, and their physical presence was far more profound than just a line of rulers. It implied that the Valley of the Forum, which the Romans later drained to create their civic center, was not an empty swamp before they arrived. It was likely the site of an Etruscan settlement, or perhaps a sacred ritual complex that the early Romans either conquered, absorbed, or simply built over as their city expanded. Guided by this evidence, later excavations dug deeper, pushing past the marble floors of the imperial era and the cobblestones of the Republic, and there, beneath it all, they found the proof. They uncovered a small, forgotten necropolis, a cemetery containing Etruscan-style tombs with grave goods that were unmistakable: fine black Baquero pottery, bronze mirrors, and ornate jewelry. You don't bury your dead in the middle of a swamp, you bury them near your home. The presence of these tombs proved that there had been an Etruscan village or ritual site right there on the spot that would become the most important public square in the ancient world. This ghost city beneath the Forum forces us to completely rethink the origins of Rome. We often imagine the Romans as a singular, monolithic culture that imposed its will on everyone else. But the reality is far more interesting. Early Rome was a melting pot, deeply influenced by its more sophisticated and powerful northern neighbors, the Etruscans. The Romans didn't just defeat the Etruscans, they absorbed them. They adopted their engineering techniques, their religious rituals, and even the symbols of political power. The fasces, the bundle of rods carried by Roman magistrates that symbolized their authority, was an Etruscan invention. The practice of divining the will of the gods by reading the flight patterns of birds or the entrails of sacrificed animals, that was Etruscan too. This discovery shows us that Rome's genius was not necessarily in invention, but in assimilation. They were the ultimate borrowers, taking the best ideas from every culture they encountered, especially the Etruscans, and making them their own. They didn't erase the past, they subsumed it. They built their glorious forum, the seat of their global empire, directly on top of the remains of the very culture that taught them how to be great. That 1-2 block in the Temple of Saturn is a perfect metaphor for all of Roman history, a grand, magnificent structure whose deepest, hidden foundations are built from the stones of those who came before. Now we travel across the world to the jungles of Cambodia, to a site that represents the absolute pinnacle of architectural ambition, Angkor Wat. This sprawling temple complex, built in the 12th century by the Khmer King Suryavarman II, is the largest religious monument on Earth. For centuries, it has been seen as the ultimate symbol of the Khmer Empire's power and devotion, a breathtaking Hindu universe rendered in stone. But a discovery made in one of its lesser-known walls revealed that this masterpiece was not the beginning of the story. It was, in fact, a magnificent new chapter written over a much older, forgotten text. The clue was a single block of laterite, a rusty red claystone that hardens when exposed to air. It was found not in a primary wall, but reused as filler in a secondary structure from the 12th century. This in itself wasn't unusual. The Khmers were master builders who often reused materials. But this particular stone was special. Its surface was inscribed not with the elegant Sanskrit and Khmer script of the Angkorian era, but with the distinct, flowing characters of the Cham language. The Cham people from what is now central Vietnam were both trading partners and fierce rivals of the Khmer Empire, and their influence was often felt through conflict. This stone, with its foreign inscription, was utterly out of place. It was a foundational block, likely from a Hindu temple, but it wasn't Khmer. It was a relic from a Cham structure, and it was embedded deep within the heart of the greatest Khmer achievement. This presented a fascinating historical puzzle. How did a sacred stone from a rival kingdom end up sealed inside the walls of Angkor Wat? The most plausible explanation is both simple and profound. It was spoils of war. The Khmer and Cham empires fought a series of brutal conflicts throughout the 11th and 12th centuries. It is highly likely that during one of his military campaigns, King Suryavarman II, or one of his predecessors, raided a major Cham temple complex, looted it, and brought back these symbolic stones as trophies of his victory and divine favor. By taking the very foundation stones of his enemies' temples and placing them within the foundations of his own, he was performing a powerful act of spiritual and political domination. He was saying, "Your gods now reside within my temple. Your power is now my power. I have literally built my success upon the pieces of your defeat." But this stone did more than just tell a story of conquest. It gave archaeologists a critical clue about what lay beneath. If a stone from a Cham temple was here, it suggested that the area had a significant history of occupation long before the 12th century. It pointed to the existence of a much older, pre-Angkorian city right under their feet. For decades, the dense jungle canopy had made it nearly impossible to map the full extent of the Angkor complex. But the advent of LiDAR technology, a revolutionary method that uses laser pulses from aircraft to digitally strip away the vegetation and map the ground surface, changed everything. Archaeologists began scanning the area around Angkor Wat, and the results were nothing short of revolutionary. The LiDAR maps revealed an entire ghost city stretching out beneath the jungle floor. They showed the clear, geometric outlines of an extensive urban grid, the foundations of homes, the routes of ancient roads, and most impressively, a complex network of canals and reservoirs that would have been used for both transportation and agriculture. This wasn't a small village, it was a vast, planned metropolis. The style of the urban planning and the pottery fragments found in subsequent excavations dated this hidden city to the 9th century, a period associated with the Chenla kingdom, a predecessor state to the Khmer Empire. For a long time, Chenla was thought to be a somewhat mythical confederation of smaller states, but here was the evidence: a major capital city that had been completely swallowed by the jungle and then built over by the later Khmer Empire. This discovery completely transforms our understanding of Angkor. We can no longer see it as a singular, miraculous achievement that appeared out of the wilderness. Instead, we must view it as the culmination of centuries of urban and cultural development. The Khmer Empire did not start from zero. They inherited the sacred landscape, the advanced hydrological engineering, and the urban blueprint of the Chenla civilization. They saw the strategic genius of this location and the spiritual power it already held, and they chose to build their own glorious project directly on top of it, reusing the land, the resources, and even the stones of their predecessors. Angkor Wat is not a standalone masterpiece. It is the most magnificent layer in a deeply recycled sacred landscape, a testament to how each great civilization imprints its own vision upon the foundations of those who came before. This pattern of one civilization building directly upon the ruins of another brings us to the rugged Peloponnese Peninsula of Greece, to the legendary citadel of Mycenae. Standing before its famous Lion Gate, you feel the weight of Homeric epic. This was the fabled city of King Agamemnon, who led the Greek armies to Troy. For centuries, the massive cyclopean walls that crown this hill were seen as the impressive beginning of Greek monumental architecture. But a seemingly insignificant piece of stone found out of place would reveal that even this mighty Bronze Age fortress was merely one layer in a much deeper story, built upon the ghost of its own forgotten predecessor. The discovery was made not within the Bronze Age ruins themselves, but in a section of wall from a much later period. After the collapse of the Mycenaean palatial civilization around 1100 BCE, the site was largely abandoned for centuries. Then, during the classical Greek period, a small community resettled the area. These new settlers, living in the shadow of those colossal, mysterious walls they believed were built by giants, needed to construct their own humble homes and defensive barriers. They did what people have always done: they scavenged. While excavating these later classical walls, archaeologists found a single, reused block of limestone that didn't match its surroundings. Its surface was scratched with a series of cryptic, angular symbols, a script we now know as Linear B. This was a staggering find. Linear B was the administrative script of the Mycenaean palatial bureaucracy, used exclusively in the late Bronze Age to record inventories of goods, offerings to the gods, and the distribution of resources. For a stone inscribed with this sacred script to be found reused in a wall built in the 5th century BCE could mean only one thing: the classical Greek settlers had stumbled upon the ruins of an even older, grander Mycenaean structure that had collapsed or been destroyed. They had pulled this inscribed block from the rubble of that earlier complex and, completely unaware of its significance, had tossed it into their new wall as simple filler. The written word, once so powerful it governed a palace economy, was now just another rock. This discarded stone became a crucial signpost for archaeologists, pointing emphatically downward. It was a clear signal that the most famous Bronze Age ruins visible on the surface were not the whole story. There had to be earlier phases of construction, older palaces that had been lost to time, buried under the very foundations of Agamemnon's citadel. Guided by this clue, excavations began to dig deeper, tunneling beneath the floors of the known late Bronze Age megarons and courtyards, and there they found it, the Ghost City. They uncovered the remains of a much earlier palace complex dating to the 13th century BCE, complete with its own grand megaron, the central hall of the king, smaller residential quarters, intricate storage rooms filled with large pithoi jars for oil and grain, and even fragments of beautiful, colorful frescoes depicting scenes of warfare and hunting. These discoveries painted a picture of a society that was already highly complex and wealthy long before the time traditionally associated with the Trojan War. This earlier city was the true foundation upon which the later, more famous Mycenae was built. Its existence helps explain the sheer scale and sophistication of the later Cyclopean walls. They weren't a sudden innovation, but the culmination of generations of architectural and engineering knowledge. The story of Mycenae is not one of a single glorious era, but of a long evolution, with each successive king or dynasty expanding and reinforcing the palace complex, often building directly on the leveled ruins of the previous generation's buildings after a fire, an earthquake, or an attack. This layering of history profoundly changes how we read the Homeric legends. The epics of Homer, compiled centuries after these events, likely wove together myths and half-remembered histories from multiple phases of Mycenaean power. Agamemnon might be a composite figure, a legendary king whose story conflates the deeds of several rulers from both this earlier ghost city and the later citadel. The Iliad and the Odyssey are not snapshots of a single moment, but a magnificent tapestry woven from threads of memory stretching back across centuries of Mycenaean history. The ghost city beneath Mycenae proves that Greek antiquity is not a simple timeline but a deep, complex tapestry. The classical Greeks built their walls with stones from the Mycenaeans, who in turn had built their palaces upon the foundations of their own ancestors, creating a continuous chain of construction, destruction, and rebirth that defines the very essence of history in the ancient world. Our journey now takes us to the sun-drenched coast of North Africa, to the legendary city of Carthage. We all know the story of how Rome, in a brutal and final act of vengeance, utterly destroyed its greatest rival at the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BCE. The Roman general Scipio Aemilianus is said to have wept as he ordered the city razed, its fields salted, and its very memory erased from the earth. For centuries, it was believed the Romans had succeeded. But the discovery of a single heavy basalt stone, found in the most ignoble of places, proved that not even Rome's most thorough act of obliteration could completely bury the truth. This stone was uncovered not in a grand temple or a palace foundation, but deep within the intricate network of a Roman sewer. It was a foundation block, thick and weighty, and it was covered in the distinct, elegant script of the Punic language, the dialect of the Phoenicians spoken in Carthage. The inscription was a dedication, likely to the goddess Tanit or her consort Baal Hammon, and it identified the stone's original location, a Tophet. A Tophet was a sacred Phoenician precinct, an open-air sanctuary where, according to historical sources and archaeological evidence, ritual offerings, including votive sacrifices, were made. This stone was a sacred object, the spiritual anchor of a holy site. Yet here it was, centuries later, lying in the dark muck of a Roman sewer, used as nothing more than common drainage rubble. The symbolism is almost too powerful to be accidental. The Romans didn't just destroy Carthage, they sought to humiliate and desecrate its memory. By tearing down the sacred Tophet and tossing one of its most important stones into the sewer, they were sending a deliberate message. They were declaring that the gods of Carthage were defeated, their power nullified, their sacred places fit only to carry the waste of the new Roman city that would be built on top of the ashes. This single discarded block is a perfect, chilling artifact of total war and cultural annihilation. But for archaeologists, it was also an incredible gift. It was a literal signpost pointing directly to where one of Carthage's most important religious sites had once stood. Following this grim clue, excavators began digging in the area where the sewer system originated. And there, beneath the elegant paved streets and villas of Roman Carthage, they found what they were looking for. They uncovered the remains of the Tophet itself, a sprawling field filled with row upon row of stone markers and funerary urns. But the discovery didn't stop there. The presence of this sacred district helped them map out the rest of the lost Phoenician city. They began to find the foundations of cramped, well-built residential quarters, with houses organized in a distinctively Phoenician style around small courtyards. They unearthed the outlines of workshops for producing the famous purple dye made from murex shells, a commodity that made Phoenician traders wealthy across the Mediterranean. Most spectacularly, their work led to the rediscovery of Carthage's legendary circular harbors. These were the engineering marvels that made the city a naval superpower. The outer harbor was for commercial traffic, a massive rectangle that welcomed ships from across the known world. But connected to it was a secret inner harbor, perfectly round and dedicated solely to the military. Along its edges were hundreds of slipways designed to hold the swift and deadly Carthaginian warships. In the center of this circular harbor was an island housing the admiral's headquarters, a command center from which the fleet that challenged Rome for control of the Mediterranean was launched. These harbors, so vital to Carthage's identity, had been completely filled in by the Romans and built over, their incredible form lost until archaeologists, guided by that one stone, knew where to look. This ghost city beneath Roman Carthage reveals the breathtaking scale of what was lost. This was not some peripheral colony. It was the magnificent capital of a sophisticated maritime empire that stretched from North Africa to Spain and Sicily. It was a city of merchants, artisans, sailors, and priests with a complex culture and a powerful religious life. The Romans didn't just conquer a rival, they erased a world. And then, in a final act of historical irony, they built their own prosperous city directly on top of it, using the rubble of the civilization they destroyed as the foundation for their own. The ghost city of Phoenician Carthage serves as a profound lesson on the nature of conquest. It shows us that victory is often not just about claiming land, but about burying the past both literally, under new construction, and figuratively, by suppressing the memory and achievements of the conquered. Yet it also proves that the past is resilient. A single stone discarded in a sewer can eventually flush the truth back to the surface, forcing us to remember the glory of what was once so completely vanquished. High up in the mist-shrouded Andes, perched between soaring peaks, Machu Picchu stands as one of the most iconic and breathtaking archaeological sites on the planet. For over a century, it has been celebrated as the ultimate masterpiece of the Inca Empire, a royal estate or sacred retreat built at the height of their power in the 15th century. Its perfectly fitted granite stones, its celestial alignments, and its seemingly impossible location have long been seen as the pure, unparalleled genius of Inca engineering. But what if this symbol of Inca achievement wasn't entirely theirs? A single, cunningly crafted stone, found quietly holding up an Inca agricultural terrace, began to tell a very different and much older story. The discovery was made not in the main ceremonial plaza, but on the periphery of the site, where a vast network of terraces cascades down the mountainside. These terraces are a marvel in themselves, preventing erosion and creating microclimates for growing crops at high altitude. During restoration work, a team carefully removed one of the granite stones from such a terrace. It was a perfect example of classic Inca stonework, finely shaped and fitted so tightly against its neighbors that not even a razor blade could slip between them. But when they turned it over, they saw something that should not have been there. on its hidden face, a face that would have been pressed against the earth, were a series of carved symbols. These weren't the geometric patterns or animal motifs common in Inca art. They were distinct, angular designs associated with the Wari culture, a powerful civilization that dominated the highlands of Peru centuries before the Inca ever rose to power, flourishing between 600 and 1000 CE. This was a profound anomaly. The Incas were famous for their mortarless precision stonework, a technique so advanced that their walls have withstood countless earthquakes. They didn't need to reuse stones, their quarries were abundant, and their stonemasons were unparalleled. So why would they take a single, beautifully carved Wari block and deliberately hide it, face down, in the foundation of a terrace? The most logical explanation is also the most revolutionary. This stone was not mere construction material. It was a relic. It suggests that when the Inca engineers arrived at this breathtaking mountaintop, they found the place already occupied, not by people, but by the remnants of a much older, sacred site built by the Wari. That carved stone was likely part of a Wari structure, perhaps a temple or a marker, recognizing the spiritual significance of the location, or perhaps seeking to co-opt the power of the earlier culture. The Incas incorporated this sacred object into their own construction. They didn't hide it away as trash. They sanctified their new terrace by anchoring it to the old world, literally building their agricultural success upon the religious foundations of their predecessors. This one stone became a compass needle pointing to a forgotten past. It prompted archaeologists to ask a question they had never seriously considered. Was Machu Picchu entirely an Inca creation? They began to survey the area around the famous citadel with new eyes and new technology. Using ground-penetrating radar and systematic excavation, they started to find answers, and those answers were everywhere. On nearby ridges and in surrounding valleys, they began to uncover the unmistakable traces of Wari occupation. They found extensive terraces that predated the Inca ones, built in a slightly different style. They uncovered the outlines of large, rectangular plazas and the stone foundations of buildings that followed Wari architectural layouts, not Inca designs. Most strikingly, they discovered a series of elaborate tombs carved into the mountainside. These were cholpas, above-ground funeral chambers, and inside they found artifacts that were definitively Wari, distinctive ceramic vessels with intricate geometric designs, finely woven textiles, and sophisticated metalwork. These tombs dated back to around 600 CE, a full 800 years before the Inca Emperor Pachacuti was said to have built Machu Picchu. This was no temporary outpost. It was a significant Wari settlement, a high-altitude ceremonial center that likely served as a hub for trade and worship, long since abandoned and reclaimed by the dense cloud forest. This ghost city surrounding Machu Picchu forces a complete re-evaluation of Inca achievement. We can no longer see them as isolated geniuses who invented their architectural marvels in a vacuum. The incredible precision of their stonework, the mastery of terracing and hydraulic engineering, even the practice of building at such dizzying altitudes, all of these appear to have deep roots in the Wari tradition. The Wari were the first great expansionist empire in the Andes, and they pioneered the techniques of statecraft, road building, and mountain agriculture that the Inca would later perfect. The Inca were brilliant innovators and adapters, but they were also inheritors. They saw the strategic and spiritual value in the places the Wari had already developed, and they built upon that ancient groundwork. This discovery connects Machu Picchu to a far longer, richer tapestry of Andean history. It transforms the site from a standalone Inca miracle into the magnificent final chapter of a 1,000-year-old architectural and cultural tradition. The Inca didn't just find an empty mountain. They chose a place that was already sacred, already powerful, and already etched with the stones of a forgotten civilization. They recognized the genius of those who came before and raised it to even greater heights, ensuring that the legacy of the Wari, though hidden for centuries, would forever be a part of one of the wonders of the world. Our journey now takes us to the very cradle of civilization itself, to the sun-baked plains of southern Iraq, where the great Ziggurat of rises from the desert like a stairway to heaven. This massive stepped pyramid, originally built around 2100 BCE by King Ur-Nammu of the Sumerian Third Dynasty, is one of the most iconic structures of the ancient world. For centuries, it stood as the sacred heart of a city that pioneered writing, law, and large-scale urban life. But even this magnificent monument, which endured for millennia, holds a secret in its very fabric, a secret revealed by a single, humble baked brick. The discovery was made not in the Ziggurat's grand staircase or its sanctified temple platform, but in a much later edition. Centuries after Ur-Nammu's death, the city was conquered and rebuilt by a succession of foreign powers, including the Babylonians and later the Kassites. These new rulers often repaired and reinforced the aging structure, adding their own layers to its history. During excavations in the 1920s by the famed archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley, his team was examining a section of wall built by the Kassites. In it, they found a brick that was clearly out of place. It was a perfectly preserved, baked mud brick, and it was stamped with a cuneiform inscription that proudly proclaimed it the property of Ur-Nammu, king of Ur. This was no ordinary brick. In Sumerian culture, such stamped bricks were the equivalent of royal foundation stones, placed in sacred structures to eternally mark the king's piety and achievement. Yet here it was, centuries after its creation, ripped from its original honored location and unceremoniously mortared into a mundane repair job by a completely different culture. This discarded brick was a message in clay, a direct line to a forgotten time. Its presence in that Kassite wall told a clear story of decline and renewal. It indicated that by the time the Kassites took control of Ur, the original ziggurat built by Ur-Nammu had already fallen into such disrepair that its own sacred bricks were being looted from the rubble to patch up the walls. For the Kassite builders, this stamped brick was just a handy piece of construction material. They were likely illiterate, completely unaware that the symbols on it celebrated the very king who had founded the structure they were now trying to maintain. They were, in effect, building with the rubble of a golden age they could no longer comprehend. But for Woolley, this brick was a priceless treasure map. It was a definitive clue that the visible ziggurat was not the first iteration. It pointed unequivocally downward, suggesting that the Grand Third Dynasty ziggurat was itself built on the foundations of a much older, original temple tower. Following this clue, Woolley's team began to dig deeper, tunneling down through the immense platform that supported the ziggurat. And there, beneath the millions of bricks laid by Ur-Nammu's workers, they made one of the most spectacular discoveries in the history of archaeology. They uncovered the ghost city of Ur in its full glory, not the later city of foreign rulers, but the original Sumerian metropolis from its peak around 2100 BCE. They found the royal cemetery, a breathtaking collection of tombs filled with unimaginable wealth, golden helmets, intricate lyres decorated with bulls' heads of lapis lazuli, and artifacts of stunning craftsmanship. But more importantly for understanding the city itself, they uncovered the residential quarters. They mapped entire neighborhoods of homes built around central courtyards, with baked clay drainage pipes running beneath the streets, evidence of sophisticated urban planning. They excavated the remains of schools called adubas, where clay tablets covered in cuneiform practice exercises revealed a highly literate society. They found vast archives, libraries of economic records, legal codes, and literary texts, including fragments of the Epic of Gilgamesh. This was not a primitive settlement. It was a thriving, complex, and deeply organized city, a true pioneer of urbanization. This incredible find emphasizes a fundamental truth about Mesopotamia. It was a land of constant, conscious recycling. Cities were not abandoned, they were rebuilt. Each new dynasty, each conquering king, would level the ruined structures of their predecessors and use that rubble as the foundation for their own new constructions. The ground level of these cities would rise steadily over the centuries, creating those iconic mounds known as tells that dot the Middle Eastern landscape. Each layer represents a different era, a different civilization, each building its identity directly upon the physical remains of the last. The Kassites built upon the Babylonians, who built upon the Amorites, who built upon the ruins of the Sumerian city of Ur. That single brick of Ur-Nammu is a perfect symbol of this endless cycle. It represents the profound Mesopotamian belief in the continuity of sacred space. A place that was holy to the Sumerian god Nana remained holy to the Babylonian moon god Sin and the Kassite gods who followed. They didn't seek a new location for their temples. They built anew upon the exact same hallowed ground, ensuring a direct physical and spiritual connection to the divine power that had always resided there. In doing so, they created a deeply layered archive of human history, where every new foundation preserved an echo of its predecessor, waiting for a curious archaeologist to read the messages left in the discarded stone. The tragedy that befell Pompeii in 79 CE did more than freeze a single day in the life of a Roman town. It created a perfect, airtight time capsule that preserved multiple eras all at once. While we famously see the final Roman layer of the city, complete with its bakeries, villas, and bustling forums, a chance discovery in the 1960s revealed that this famous snapshot is actually the last page of a much longer story. During work on the Stabian Baths, one of the city's largest bath complexes, archaeologists noticed something unusual about the construction. Among the precise Roman brickwork was a large, roughly cut block of volcanic tuff that looked decidedly out of place. Its surface was carved with a series of angular, unfamiliar letters, an inscription in the Oscan language. This was a remarkable find. Oscan was the language of the Samnites, a confederation of Italic tribes from the mountainous interior who controlled Pompeii for centuries before the Roman legions arrived. The inscription on this block was a dedication, likely from a public building or a temple. Its presence here, mortared into the foundation of a distinctly Roman bathhouse, told a clear and violent story. It was spolia, a piece of looted architecture. This stone had been forcibly taken from a Samnite structure that was demolished after the Roman general Sulla conquered Pompeii in 89 BCE during the Social War. The Romans, in their typical fashion of demonstrating total control, had torn down the symbols of the old Samnite order and used the rubble to build the infrastructure of their new regime. That bathhouse wasn't just a place to get clean, it was a statement of power, its very foundations made from the bones of the conquered culture. This discarded Oscan block became the key that unlocked Pompeii's deepest secret. It was a giant arrow pointing downward, telling archaeologists that beneath the elegant Roman villas and orderly streets lay the ghost of a completely different city. Following this clue, excavators began to look for evidence of this pre-Roman past, and they found it everywhere. By carefully digging below the floor levels of Roman houses and public buildings, they uncovered an entire Samnite city, buried under a layer of volcanic debris that was separate from the final ashfall. They found the foundations of older, Oscan-style houses built with a different architectural plan, often around a central courtyard called an atrium. They discovered temples dedicated to Samnite gods, whose names and rituals were different from the Roman pantheon that would later dominate the Forum. The layout of this ghost city was different too. The streets didn't follow the same grid. They were narrower and more organic, reflecting a community that had grown slowly over time rather than being planned by military engineers. The artifacts from this layer were distinct as well: pottery with different designs, coins minted by Samnite rulers, and inscriptions that showed a vibrant, independent culture with its own laws and social structure. This was not a primitive village. It was a prosperous, sophisticated, and fiercely independent Samnite town that had been a thriving hub in the region for generations before Rome ever set its sights on the Bay of Naples. What emerges from these deeper excavations is a far more nuanced picture of Pompeii's history. The Roman conquest wasn't a simple act of destruction and replacement. It was a process of absorption and adaptation. The evidence shows that after the initial conquest, the Samnite inhabitants of Pompeii didn't just vanish. They stayed, and they gradually adapted to Roman rule. Many of the wealthy Samnite families appear to have retained their status and wealth, eventually becoming Roman citizens and integrating into the new power structure. They learned Latin, they adopted Roman customs, and they rebuilt their homes in the latest Roman style, literally burying their old Oscan identity under new layers of plaster and mosaic. This makes Pompeii's story infinitely more fascinating. The city we see preserved in ash is not a purely Roman creation. It is a cultural hybrid, a place where Samnite traditions and Roman innovations fused together over 150 years of coexistence. The final, tragic layer of ash from Vesuvius didn't just preserve a Roman city, it immortalized this entire process of cultural transition. It captured a moment where the old Samnite past, though hidden beneath new floors and behind new walls, was still very much a part of the city's foundation. The tragedy of Pompeii is that it preserved not one history, but two: the vibrant, visible world of its Roman present, and the silent, sturdy ghost of its Samnite past, waiting centuries for a single discarded stone to tell its story. Moving southeast across the African continent, we arrive at one of the most magnificent and misunderstood ruins in the world: Great Zimbabwe. For generations, European colonists, unwilling to believe that an advanced civilization could be indigenous to sub-Saharan Africa, spun fantastical tales about its origins. They claimed it must have been the work of the Phoenicians, the Queen of Sheba, or any number of foreign powers. But the truth was waiting to be found, not in grand towers, but in a single, humble block of soapstone that had been carelessly built into a later wall. This soapstone block was unlike the other stones in the massive, dry stone walls for which the site is famous. It was smaller, and its surface was not plain. It was intricately carved with a series of geometric patterns and, most importantly, a distinct symbol, a faint but clear crescent moon. This was not a local Shona motif. This crescent was an unmistakable symbol of the Arab world, a common feature in the Islamic art of the Swahili coast traders who had plied the Indian Ocean for centuries. This stone was a fragment of something else, something older. It was a piece of a ritual object or perhaps a trader's seal that had been repurposed, its original meaning lost and used as simple filler in a construction project. For archaeologists, this small, carved block was a revolutionary clue. Its presence suggested that long before the famous stone enclosures and the Great Enclosure itself were built, this site was already significant. It pointed to an earlier phase of occupation, one that was directly connected to the vast, sophisticated trade networks that stretched across the Indian Ocean. The stone was a breadcrumb, and following its trail, excavators began to look beyond the iconic walls. they dug deeper in the surrounding valleys and on the peripheries of the main complex. And there they found the evidence, the foundations of simpler, older structures made from a combination of clay and rough stone, known as dhaka. These remains were carbon dated to the 11th century, a full 300 years before the Kingdom of Zimbabwe reached its peak in the 14th century. This was the ghost city, the original settlement. It wasn't a grand capital yet, but it was already a thriving hub. The people living here were not isolated. They were active and vital participants in a global economic system. They were trading with merchants from Arabia, Persia, India, and even as far away as China. What were they trading? The answer was found in the very earth beneath their feet. This region was rich in gold, ivory, and other precious commodities that were in high demand across the ancient world. This early settlement was likely a strategic trading post, a place where local leaders managed the flow of wealth from the African interior to the coastal ports of Sofala and Kilwa, where Arab dhows waited to carry it across the ocean. This discovery completely shatters the old, racist colonial narratives. Great Zimbabwe was not built by foreigners. It was built by the ancestors of the Shona people, and its rise was a direct result of indigenous African innovation and economic savvy. The spectacular stone architecture that we see today, the massive, curved walls and the iconic conical tower, was not the beginning of the story. It was the magnificent culmination. The wealth generated from centuries of successful trade provided the resources and the need for a grander, more permanent capital. The later rulers didn't abandon the site, they built upon it, literally and figuratively. They took the economic foundations laid by their ancestors, the trade routes, the relationships, the knowledge of commerce, and used that prosperity to construct a stone city that would proclaim their power and divinity to the world. The evolution of Great Zimbabwe is a powerful testament to organic, internal growth. The earliest phase was a functional trading community. The next phase saw the construction of the hill complex, a more fortified area likely used for rituals and by the emerging elite. Finally, with immense wealth and centralized power, they undertook the construction of the great enclosure in the valley, a vast, walled structure that probably served as the royal palace. Each phase built directly upon the last, each new wall constructed with the confidence and resources earned from the phase before. That one discarded soapstone block with its foreign crescent is the key that unlocked this entire history. It proves that African history is not a story of isolation and stagnation, but of dynamic connection, economic brilliance, and monumental achievement that stands proudly on its own terms, built layer by layer upon its own solid foundations. Deep within the labyrinth of Mohenjo-Daro, one of the great capitals of the Indus Valley civilization, archaeologists were meticulously mapping an advanced drainage system. This network of covered channels and cesspits was a hallmark of Harappan engineering genius, a testament to a society that prized urban order and sanitation over 4,000 years ago. But during this work, a team noticed something unusual. One particular brick in the wall of a drainage channel didn't quite match its neighbors. It was a standard fired Harappan brick, perfectly proportioned in the famous 1:2:4 ratio, but its surface was different. While the other bricks were plain, this one was inscribed with a series of mysterious, elegant symbols, a line of the still undeciphered Indus script. This was no accident. The brick had been fired and inscribed centuries earlier to serve a much more important purpose, likely as part of a public building or a wealthy merchant's home, where its markings might have denoted a name, a blessing, or a commercial record. Yet here it was, centuries later, stripped of its original dignity and repurposed as a simple piece of plumbing. This was not a case of later invaders reusing materials. This was the work of the Harappans themselves. This single, discarded brick became a silent witness to a city in decline, a clue that the people of Mohenjo-Daro were, at some point, forced to cannibalize their own architecture just to keep their city functioning. The inscription on that brick provided a crucial temporal anchor. The style of the script placed it firmly in what scholars call the mature Harappan period, the civilization's golden age between 2600 and 1900 BCE. Its presence in a later drainage repair indicated that the original structure it came from was even older. This brick was a direct message from the peak of Indus power, and it pointed archaeologists emphatically downward. If this brick from a grand older building was now being used for basic infrastructure, it meant that the older, original layers of the city must be buried deep below. Following this clue, excavations began to dig past the familiar grid of streets and well-known structures like the Great Bath. What they found was nothing short of astonishing. Beneath the iconic city lay the ghost city, the original Mohenjo-Daro. They uncovered older residential quarters with a slightly different layout, evidence of a community that was still experimenting with its famous grid-like urban plan. They found simpler, earlier granaries, suggesting the system for storing surplus grain and managing a complex economy had evolved over time. Most strikingly, they found these older layers were buried under a thick, uniform layer of silt. This wasn't the debris of a sudden catastrophe. It was the evidence of a slow, insidious, and recurring threat devastating floods from the mighty and unpredictable Indus River. This discovery paints a heartbreaking picture of a brilliant civilization locked in a relentless struggle with its environment. The people of the Indus Valley weren't just master planners, they were resilient fighters. They built their cities with baked bricks to withstand moisture. They raised their citadels on massive mud brick platforms to stay above the floodwaters. Their elaborate drainage systems were not a luxury. They were an essential tool for survival, designed to channel water away as quickly as possible after the annual inundations. For centuries, they succeeded. Their cities thrived, and their culture flourished across a region larger than ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. But eventually, the environment may have won. The evidence suggests a terrifying cycle. A massive flood would inundate the city, depositing a layer of silt and clay. The inhabitants would return, clear the streets and courtyards, patch their buildings with whatever materials were at hand, including bricks looted from older, ruined structures, and rebuild. They did this over and over again, each time building on top of the debris of the last disaster, slowly raising the level of their entire city. You can see this clearly in the archaeology of Mohenjo-Daro. The city is a layer cake of construction, with later streets and doorways sitting several meters above the earliest foundations. This exhausting cycle of destruction and rebuilding would have placed an enormous strain on their resources and their morale. This ghost city beneath Mohenjo-Daro forces us to see the Indus Valley civilization not as a static, perfect society that suddenly vanished, but as a dynamic culture that fought a long, slow battle against a changing world. The gradual shifting of river courses, combined with possible climate change that altered monsoon patterns, may have finally broken their spirit. The very river that gave them life, that watered their crops and carried their trade goods, ultimately became their undoing, slowly burying their greatest achievements under layers of silt and mud. That one inscribed brick tossed into a drain is more than just a piece of rubble. It is a symbol of this desperate adaptation, a last-ditch effort to hold back the water and preserve a way of life, even as the world they knew was literally disappearing beneath their feet. For centuries, the prevailing image of the Great Pyramid's construction has been one of brutal, back-breaking slave labor, a narrative popularized by Hollywood and even ancient historians like Herodotus, who wrote of 100,000 men whipped into submission under the scorching sun. This idea of a vast, suffering mass building a pharaoh's tomb out of fear seemed to fit with these colossal, imposing monuments, but a single, unassuming piece of limestone found far from the pyramids themselves would completely shatter that myth, revealing a truth far more fascinating about how such an impossible project was actually achieved. The discovery was made not on the Giza Plateau proper, but in a nearby cemetery reserved for officials and nobles. Archaeologists were examining a tomb from a much later period, its walls constructed from a mix of new stone and older, recycled blocks. One such block, clearly taken from a different, ruined site, caught their attention. It was inscribed with hastily written hieratic script, a cursive form of Egyptian hieroglyphs used for everyday administrative purposes. This wasn't a formal, royal inscription. It was a workman's note, a logistical record, and its message was electrifying. It made a direct reference to the provisioning of a specific settlement, naming it as the community of the Ak-Hit Khufu work gang, the direct translation being the horizon of Khufu, or more simply, the town of the pyramid builders. This discarded administrative note was a literal address. It was the clue that sent archaeologists away from the pyramids and out into the surrounding desert, to a sandy area known to the local Bedouin as Hight El Ghurab, which means the Wall of the Crow. Guided by this written directions, they began to dig, and what they uncovered was nothing short of a ghost city. This was not a haphazard encampment of slaves. They found the remains of long, narrow barracks capable of housing between 40 and 50 men in each unit, suggesting a rotating, organized workforce. They uncovered enormous communal bakeries, capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread every single day to feed this immense operation. They found vast vats for fermenting and brewing beer, which was not just a recreational drink but a crucial source of calories and nutrients for the laborers. Perhaps most stunningly, they uncovered the remains of what can only be described as a state-of-the-art medical facility. The excavations revealed evidence of highly advanced trauma care and surgery. They found skeletons with set and healed broken bones, indicating that injured workers were cared for and given time to recover, not left to die. They discovered the remains of an amputee who had lived for many years after his operation, proving a sophisticated understanding of surgical aftercare. This level of community investment is completely inconsistent with the idea of a disposable slave workforce. It points instead to a highly valued, skilled labor force that was worth protecting and maintaining. The scale of this operation was staggering. Estimates suggest that at its peak, this workers' city housed a permanent population of several thousand skilled laborers, with additional crews rotating in on a temporary basis from nearby villages, likely as part of a national service tax system. These weren't slaves, they were likely proud Egyptian citizens, skilled stonemasons, engineers, carpenters, and laborers who were well-fed, well-housed, and received medical care. They were participants in a national project of immense religious and political significance, and they were probably honored for their role in ensuring the pharaoh's successful journey to the afterlife. This discovery forces a complete rewrite of the social history behind the pyramids. The construction was not an act of tyrannical oppression, but a massive, state-organized logistical feat. It required the coordination of not just quarrymen and builders, but bakers, brewers, doctors, scribes, priests, and administrators. The pyramid itself was just the tip of the iceberg. The real achievement was the entire functioning society that supported its construction. This was a project that mobilized the entire economy and manpower of Egypt, not through the crack of a whip, but through organization, belief, and the promise of a well-fed, well-cared-for life. And what happened to this incredible city once the last pyramid was complete? and the final casing stone was polished and set into place, the answer lies in the very environment that surrounds it. The city of Hittite El Ghurab was always a temporary installation built on the very edge of the Sahara Desert. Once the project ended, the crews packed up their tools, the administrators moved on to new ventures, and the city was simply abandoned to the elements. Without constant maintenance, the relentless desert sands driven by the wind quickly began to reclaim the land. Within a few generations, the barracks, the bakeries, the hospitals, and the homes were completely buried, leaving no trace on the surface. The memory of the thousands of skilled workers who built one of the wonders of the world faded into obscurity, their story replaced by the easier, more dramatic narrative of slave labor. It took a single, discarded piece of limestone, a forgotten memo from a project manager, to bring their entire world and their true story back into the light after 4,500 years. Nestled in the rugged highlands of central Turkey, the sprawling ruins of Hatusa stand as a silent testament to one of the Bronze Age's most formidable superpowers, the Hittite Empire. For centuries, this was the nerve center of a kingdom that rivaled Egypt and Babylon, a city of grand temples and imposing gates where treaties were sealed and armies were dispatched. Yet its downfall was so complete that for generations, its very existence faded into myth, remembered only through cryptic mentions in Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hebrew scriptures. The key to unlocking its deepest secrets wasn't found in a royal tomb or a treasure hoard, but in a single, battered block of andesite stone, carelessly built into a wall by people who had no memory of the empire that stone once represented. This particular block was discovered in a section of fortification that was clearly not Hittite. The construction style was different, cruder, simpler. It was part of a later Phrygian settlement, built centuries after Hatusa had been consumed by fire and abandoned. But this one stone stood out. While the surrounding rocks were rough and unmarked, its surface was smooth and, most importantly, inscribed with a series of intricate, elegant symbols. These were Luwian hieroglyphs, the beautiful pictorial script used by the Hittites for monumental inscriptions on their sacred buildings. This was no ordinary building block. It was a piece of a temple or a royal stele, an object that had once been carved with prayers to the storm god Teshub or to record the deeds of a great king. Yet here it was, stripped of its sacred purpose and used as simple rubble fill in the wall of a people who were essentially squatters living atop a forgotten world. The message of that discarded stone was heartbreakingly clear. It meant that when the Phrygian people arrived at this site, perhaps generations after the Hittite collapse, they found the place in utter ruins. The great ashlar blocks of the Hittite walls were too large and heavy for them to move, so they left the grand foundations in place, but they scavenged the smaller, movable pieces like this inscribed block and used them to build their own humble defenses. They were illiterate. The beautiful hieroglyphs meant nothing more to them than convenient chisel marks. They were living on the corpse of a giant, building their huts from its bones, completely unaware of the glorious civilization they were trampling underfoot. For archaeologists in the late 19th and 20th centuries, this stone was a Rosetta Stone for Hatusa. It was a definitive signpost pointing downward. If a Phrygian wall contained a Hittite inscribed block, then the true, original Hittite city must lie buried beneath the later accumulation of Phrygian, Hellenistic, and even Byzantine settlements. Guided by this clue, excavators began to dig deeper, and the ghost city they uncovered was nothing short of breathtaking. They found the massive foundations of the original citadel, with cyclopean walls that would have dwarfed the later Phrygian constructions. They uncovered the vast network of subterranean tunnels and granaries that could have withstood a years-long siege. most importantly, they made a discovery that would rewrite the history of the ancient world, the royal archives. In a protected chamber, they found not just a few tablets, but thousands of them. These clay documents, baked hard in the fires that destroyed the city, constituted the entire bureaucratic records of the Hittite Empire. They were written in a variety of languages, including Akkadian, the diplomatic lingua franca of the age, and they contained everything from tax records and legal codes to detailed correspondence with other great kings. There were letters to and from the pharaohs of Egypt, including a copy of the famous peace treaty signed after the Battle of Kadesh, which established a lasting peace between the two superpowers. These tablets revealed Hatusa not as a barbaric outpost, but as the sophisticated administrative heart of a highly organized, multi-ethnic empire that operated on a truly global scale, with a complex legal system that emphasized restitution over vengeance. This incredible find illuminates one of history's most dramatic patterns: the catastrophic political collapse. The end of the Hittite Empire around 1200 BCE was part of a wider Bronze Age collapse that saw the fall of nearly every major civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean. A perfect storm of factors: climate change leading to drought and famine, mass migrations of mysterious sea peoples, and perhaps internal rebellions shattered the intricate network of international trade and diplomacy that sustained these empires. Hatusa was burned and abandoned so completely that its memory was utterly erased for centuries. The knowledge of its writing, its laws, and its gods vanished from the land. Its great cities were not built over by a successor state, but were left to decay until entirely new cultures with no connection to the past eventually moved into the empty landscape. The story of Hatusa is the ultimate example of how a civilization can be so thoroughly annihilated that its only witnesses are the scattered stones it left behind. That one andesite block in the Phrygian wall is a powerful metaphor for this historical amnesia. It represents a broken link in the chain of human memory, a message from a lost world that no one was left to read. The Hittites, who once dictated terms to pharaohs, were reduced to literal building material for goat herders, yet it also shows the resilience of evidence. No matter how complete the destruction, how total the collapse, or how long the silence, the past always leaves fragments behind. These fragments wait patiently for a curious mind to piece them back together, allowing a ghost city to speak once more, telling us of its glory, its sophistication, and its sudden, terrifying end. Deep within the humid embrace of the Guatemalan jungle, where howler monkeys proclaim their territory from the canopy, the towering temples of Tikal pierce the sky. For generations, these breathtaking structures have defined our image of the Maya Classic period, a golden age of powerful kings, intricate calendars, and architectural mastery around 600 CE. It's easy to stand in the Grand Plaza and feel you are at the very heart of Maya achievement, but a discovery made in the shadow of one of these great temples revealed that this iconic skyline was merely the magnificent finale of a story that began over 1,000 years earlier. The clue was a single block of limestone pulled from the core of a classic period temple during conservation work. To the untrained eye, it was just another piece of rubble. But to an epigrapher, a scholar of ancient writing, its surface told a different tale. It was inscribed with a series of glyphs, but their style was all wrong. They were more archaic, more pictographic, and less refined than the elegant, standardized script of the classic Maya. These were early Maya glyphs, a form of writing that predated Tikal's famous rulers by centuries. This block was not originally carved for the temple it was found in. It was a piece of history, looted from a much older structure, and unceremoniously used as filler in the foundation of the new. It was a message in stone from a ghost city, a place the later Maya knew existed but whose full story had been completely lost to the jungle and to time. This discarded block became a crucial temporal marker, pointing archaeologists emphatically downward. If a stone from a pre-classic building was embedded in a classic temple, it meant the Maya of Tikal's golden age were building directly atop the ruins of their own ancestors. Guided by this clue, excavations began to dig deeper, tunneling below the floors of the grand plazas and pyramids. And there, buried under meters of earth and later construction, they found the evidence of Tikal's first incarnation. They uncovered the foundations of modest temples from the pre-classic era, dating back as far as 600 BCE. They found simple tombs containing jade ornaments and beautifully painted pottery that was stylistically distinct from anything made in the classic period. This was not a primitive village, it was a thriving early ceremonial center, a nucleus of culture and power that had already established the sacred geography upon which everything else would later be built. The true revolution in understanding this ghost city, however, came from the sky. The dense jungle canopy had always made traditional surveying nearly impossible, hiding the full extent of the ancient metropolis. But with the advent of LiDAR technology, a revolutionary method that uses laser pulses to digitally strip away the vegetation, archaeologists could finally see the ground surface in stunning detail. The resulting maps were nothing short of revelatory. They showed that the pre-classic Maya had already undertaken a breathtaking feat of urban planning. The LiDAR revealed the ghostly outlines of an extensive network of causeways known as Sakbiob that connected different districts of the city long before the Great Pyramids were ever conceived. Even more impressively, the scans exposed a sophisticated system of water management. The Maya of the pre-classic era had transformed the landscape, excavating massive reservoirs to capture and store rainwater for the dry season. They didn't just adapt to their environment, they engineered it on a grand scale to support a large, urban population. This evidence completely shatters the old narrative of the pre-classic as a simple, formative period. It reveals a society that was already highly complex, socially organized, and technologically brilliant. They were not amateurs learning how to build a city. They were master planners laying down an urban blueprint that would be followed and amplified for the next 800 years. What emerges from this evidence is a powerful new understanding of Maya civilization as one of incredible longevity and intentionality. Tikal was not a city that simply grew organically. It was a consciously recycled sacred landscape. Each new dynasty, each powerful king, sought to legitimize their rule by physically connecting their achievements to the deep past. They didn't clear away the old temples, they encased them. They built their own monumental pyramids directly over the older, smaller ones, like Russian nesting dolls made of stone. The towering temple eye that we see today is likely just the final, magnificent shell around a sequence of at least 5 earlier temples, each one containing the tomb of a ruler, each new layer adding to the spiritual and political power of the location. This pattern reveals a cultural philosophy that valued continuity and reverence for the past. The later Maya knew they were standing on the shoulders of giants, their own ancestors. By building upon these ancient foundations, they were not erasing history, they were honoring it and claiming its legacy as their own. The discarded stone with the early glyphs is a perfect symbol of this process. It wasn't trash to them, it was a sacred relic from the founding era, and by placing it within the heart of their new temple, they were spiritually anchoring their present to that hallowed past. The ghost city beneath Tikal is a testament to a civilization that saw itself as part of a continuous, unbroken chain, a 1,000-year project to build a city worthy of the gods, with each generation adding its own chapter to a story written not on paper, but in the very limestone of the jungle itself. Now we journey to the heart of ancient Persia, to the magnificent ceremonial capital of Persepolis. This was the glorious seat of the Achaemenid Empire, a sprawling complex of palaces and audience halls built on a massive artificial terrace by kings like Darius the Great and Xerxes. It was designed to stun visitors with the sheer power and majesty of the Persian throne. But during excavations of the Apadana, the Great Audience Hall, archaeologists made a curious discovery that hinted at a much deeper history for this site. Embedded within the foundation of a grand staircase was a single block of granite that stood out starkly from the surrounding limestone. Its surface was inscribed, but not with the elegant old Persian cuneiform of the Achaemenid kings. The script was older and more angular. It was Elamite, the language of a civilization that had flourished in this very region centuries before the Persians ever rose to power. This was no ordinary building stone. It was a foundation block, the kind used to sanctify and mark an important public building or temple. Its presence here, buried deep within the foundations of a Persian palace, could mean only one thing. It was spolia, a piece of looted architecture. The stone had been forcibly taken from a ruined Elamite complex, its original meaning and sanctity disregarded, and used as mere rubble fill to help level the ground for the vast new Persian construction project. For the Persian engineers, it was just a convenient, heavy rock, but for archaeologists, it was a priceless clue, a direct message from a forgotten world that predated the Persian Empire itself. This discarded block was a giant arrow pointing downward, suggesting that the grand Persian capital was not built on a blank slate, but was constructed directly atop the ghost of a much older, significant Elamite center. Guided by this stone, excavations began to dig below the immense platform of Persepolis, and there, beneath the foundations of the palaces of Darius and Xerxes, they found the evidence. They uncovered the remains of a substantial settlement dating back to the 7th century BCE, complete with the foundations of large, multi-roomed buildings that appeared to be administrative storerooms or treasury buildings, given the clay ceilings and accounting tablets found nearby. Most strikingly, they found altars. These were not the grand fire altars of later Zoroastrian practice, but simpler, stone-built platforms that aligned with known Elamite religious customs. This was not a random village. The evidence pointed to this place being an important provincial center of the Elamite kingdom, perhaps a religious site or a governor's administrative complex, known in Elamite texts as Meitsish. This was the ghost city, a place of significance that was already here when the first Persian architects surveyed the site. This discovery forces a complete re-evaluation of why Darius the Great chose this specific spot for his magnificent new capital. It was not just about finding a large, flat piece of land. It was a deeply calculated political and spiritual decision. The Elamites were not a forgotten people. They had been the dominant civilization in the region for over 2,000 years before the Persians. Their kingdom, with its capital at Susa, was a sophisticated, ancient power that the early Persians would have viewed with a mixture of respect and rivalry. By building Persepolis directly on top of this older Elamite center, Darius was performing a powerful act of symbolic appropriation. He was not erasing the past, he was claiming it. He was physically and spiritually anchoring his new dynasty, his new empire, to the deep history and legitimacy of the land. He was saying, the power that once resided here with the Elamites now belongs to us. We are the new masters of this ancient realm, and we build our future upon the foundations of the old order. This philosophy of incorporation, rather than mere conquest, defined the entire Achaemenid imperial project. The art and architecture of Persepolis itself are a testament to this. The famous reliefs on the staircases do not only depict Persian nobles, they show a vast procession of delegates from every corner of the empire: Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Indians, each bringing tribute and each wearing their distinct national dress. The Persians presented themselves as the unifiers of the world, the benevolent rulers of a vast multicultural commonwealth. The use of that Elamite foundation stone fits this pattern perfectly. It shows that this policy of inclusion started right at home, in the very ground beneath their feet. They incorporated the symbols of the preceding cultures of Iran into the bedrock of their own identity. The ghost city beneath Persepolis reveals that the mightiest empires are often the greatest recyclers of history. They understand that power is not just about military strength, but about legitimacy and continuity. The Achaemenids could have chosen to build their capital anywhere. They chose to build it here on this specific patch of ground because it was already hallowed by time and by the presence of a previous civilization they sought to both honor and supersede. The grandeur of Persepolis was not a spontaneous explosion of Persian culture. It was the magnificent final layer built upon a cultural foundation that was millennia in the making, a profound statement that even the most powerful empire knows it stands on the shoulders of those who came before. Now we travel to the historic city of York in northern England, a place whose ancient walls seem to tell 1,000 years of English history. But beneath the cobbled streets and the magnificent York Minster Cathedral lies a far more complex and layered story, one that was unlocked by a single piece of sandstone found in a most unlikely place. During the 1970s, construction workers were doing routine repairs on a medieval wall when they noticed one particular block that didn't quite fit. It was older than the others, and its surface was covered in deep, angular carvings. These weren't the decorative marks of a medieval mason, they were runes, the written script of the Vikings. This stone was a fragment of a lost world, a piece of a Viking Age building that had been torn down, and its materials scavenged to build something new. The message of that runic stone was clear. It pointed to a period of dramatic upheaval and conquest, specifically the Norman invasion of 1066. When William the Conqueror arrived from France, he faced fierce resistance in the north of England. To crush this rebellion, he embarked on a brutal campaign known as the Harrying of the North, laying waste to entire towns and villages. The city of York, a thriving Viking trade hub, was a key target. Historical records tell us the Normans burned and destroyed large sections of the city. This stone was physical evidence of that violent erasure. A building sacred or important to the Norse inhabitants of York was deliberately demolished, and one of its inscribed blocks was tossed into the foundation of a new Norman wall, a symbolic act of conquest where the new regime literally built its order upon the rubble of the old. This single clue was the key that unlocked one of the most spectacular archaeological discoveries in Europe. Archaeologists, knowing exactly where to dig, began excavating the area where the stone was found. What they uncovered was nothing short of a time capsule. They found that the waterlogged, clay-like soil in this part of York possessed a unique chemical property. It was anaerobic, meaning it contained almost no oxygen. This environment is a miracle for preservation. Organic materials that would normally rot away in centuries, wood, cloth, leather, even insects and seeds were found in a state of near-perfect preservation. They hadn't just found a few artifacts, they had found an entire ghost city frozen in time. This was Jorvik, the name the Vikings gave to York when they captured it in the 9th century and made it the capital of their own kingdom. Peeling back the layers, the archaeologists mapped out a complete Norse settlement from the 9th and 10th centuries. They found the wharves and jetties along the River Foss, where Viking longships and trading gnars would have been tied up, unloading goods from across the known world. They uncovered dense, urban plots of land, each one containing the remains of a wooden longhouse, a workshop, and even backyard fences and privies. The level of detail was breathtaking. Inside the workshops, they found the tools of 100 different trades, the anvils of blacksmiths, the looms of weavers, the lathes of woodworkers turning cups from maple wood, and the crucibles of silversmiths and goldsmiths crafting intricate jewelry. This wasn't a raider's camp, it was a permanent, sophisticated, and bustling urban center, a hub of industry and commerce that would have been filled with the sounds of hammers, the smell of wood smoke and tanning leather, and the chatter of multiple languages. The artifacts pulled from the mud told the story of a truly global city. There were coins from the Middle East, scraps of silk from Byzantium, and amber from the Baltic Sea. They found a single preserved sock, its pattern still visible. They found wooden bowls with the knife marks from their last meal still etched into the surface, and over 100,000 pieces of animal bone that revealed a detailed diet, including the bones of rare fish like sturgeon, which was likely a food for the elite. Perhaps most remarkably, they found evidence of the people themselves. Analysis of the preserved waste, yes, even ancient human feces provided insights into their health, their diet, and the intestinal parasites they lived with. This was intimate, undeniable proof of a vibrant community living their daily lives. The story of Jorvik completely transforms our understanding of the Vikings in England. The popular image is of horn-helmeted raiders who came only to pillage and burn, but the ghost city beneath York reveals a different reality. After their initial conquest, the Vikings didn't just leave. They stayed, they settled down, they became farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and rulers. They married into local families, they established laws, and they integrated into the fabric of Britain. Jorvik became one of the most important trading ports in Northern Europe, a cosmopolitan entry point for goods and ideas from Scandinavia, the Frankish Empire, and beyond. The Vikings were not just destroyers, they were nation builders and city dwellers whose economic and cultural contributions were foundational to the England that would later emerge. Yet, this entire chapter of history was almost lost. The Norman conquest sought to impose a new, centralized French-speaking order on England. The Old Norse-speaking elite were displaced, their power broken, their buildings torn down. As York was rebuilt over the following centuries in the medieval and then modern style, the physical evidence of the Viking city was buried deeper and deeper, its memory fading into a few place names and legends. That one runestone, discarded in a wall, was the fragile thread that connected the present to this forgotten past. It proves that the history of great European cities is not a simple, linear story of one culture replacing another. It is a story of layers, of immigrant communities arriving, putting down roots, building a life, and then having their contributions buried both literally and figuratively by the next wave of change. The ghost city of Jorvik is a powerful reminder that our urban landscapes are palimpsests, and that the foundations of our modern world are often built upon the rich, diverse, and hidden contributions of those who came before. Now we cross the Bosphorus to a city that has been the capital of two world-spanning empires, a place where the very ground seems to hum with the weight of history. Istanbul. Here, the practice of building upon the past isn't just a theme, it's the city's fundamental architectural DNA. This was never more apparent than during restoration work on a magnificent 16th century Ottoman mosque. High up on a wall, workers noticed a marble block that didn't match its neighbors, while the surrounding stones were carved with intricate Arabic calligraphy and floral patterns. This one bore the distinct, elegant lettering of Byzantine Greek. It was a foundation stone, and its inscription was a Christian prayer, a sacred dedication from a church that had been standing on this spot centuries before the first Ottoman Sultan ever set foot in the city. This marble block was a silent witness to one of history's most pivotal moments, the fall of Constantinople in 1453, when the armies of Sultan Mehmed II finally breached the legendary walls of the city. It wasn't just a military victory, it was a profound cultural and religious conquest. Part of establishing the new Islamic order involved a symbolic transformation of the urban landscape. Major churches, including the Grand Hagia Sophia, were converted into mosques. But many smaller churches were not so fortunate. They were deliberately dismantled. Their materials, their marble columns, their finely cut stones, even their sacred foundation blocks became a convenient quarry for the ambitious new building projects of the conquering Ottomans. That Greek inscribed marble block wasn't just rubble. It was a trophy, a symbol of a vanquished faith, repurposed to hold up the walls of the triumphant new religion. For the Ottoman builders, it was likely just a handy piece of stone, but for archaeologists centuries later, it was a treasure map, a direct clue pointing to the existence of a magnificent Byzantine ghost city lying just beneath the surface of Ottoman Istanbul. This single clue, and others like it, guided modern excavators to one of the most spectacular urban archaeological sites ever discovered, the Yenikapi excavation. What began as a routine dig for a new subway station and railway tunnels soon exploded into a monumental window into the past. As bulldozers peeled back the layers, they didn't just find Ottoman foundations. They began to uncover the outlines of the legendary Theodosian harbor, a bustling port built in the 4th century by Emperor Theodosius I. For over 1,000 years, this had been the main commercial lifeline of the Eastern Roman Empire, the harbor where grain ships from Egypt and merchant vessels from across the Mediterranean would dock. But by the Ottoman era, centuries of silt from the nearby Lycus River had completely filled it in, pushing the coastline farther out and burying the entire harbor district under meters of earth. The memory of its very location was lost until that subway project accidentally broke through its forgotten world. What they found was nothing less than a time capsule of Byzantine daily life, perfectly preserved in the waterlogged, oxygen-free mud. The silt had acted as a perfect seal, protecting organic materials that would have normally rotted away centuries ago. The most breathtaking finds were the ships themselves. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of 37 Byzantine galleys and merchant vessels, from small fishing boats to massive sea-going ships. These weren't just fragments of wood. These were nearly entire hulls, their planks and ribs still held together by the original wooden pegs and iron nails used by their builders over 1,000 years earlier. It was the largest collection of medieval ships ever found in a single location, a fleet frozen in time at the bottom of a vanished harbor. But the ships were just the beginning. The mud yielded an astonishing array of artifacts that painted a vivid picture of life in the heart of the Byzantine Empire. They found the footprints of a long-lost wooden wharf with the rope ties still attached. They unearthed thousands of ceramic amphorae that once held wine, oil, and fish sauce from every corner of the Mediterranean. There were delicate glass bottles, wooden combs, and leather shoes lost in the mud by dockworkers over a millennium ago. They found animal bones that revealed the diet of the city's inhabitants, and even the seeds of fruits and vegetables that were traded through the port. Most poignantly, they found a single preserved skeleton of a camel, likely an exotic import that had somehow met its end on the docks. This wasn't just an archaeological site. It was a moment of daily life from the 4th century, suddenly and dramatically preserved. The ghost city revealed at Yenikapi shows us that Istanbul's history is the ultimate urban palimpsest. The modern city is built upon the Ottoman city, which is built upon the Byzantine city, which is itself built upon the foundations of Roman and even earlier Greek settlements. Each empire, each civilization didn't clear the slate. They built directly on top of what was there before, often using the ruins of the past as the foundation for their future. The Ottomans built their mosques over Byzantine churches, which were sometimes built over Roman temples. The grand Topkapi Palace of the Sultans was constructed on the Acropolis of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. This continuous recycling of sacred and civic space makes Istanbul a unique historical document, a city where you can literally peel back the layers and travel backward through time. That one discarded marble block in an Ottoman mosque is a perfect symbol of this endless cycle of construction, conquest, and renewal, a single stone that connects the prayer of a Byzantine Christian to the faith of an Ottoman Muslim, all within the walls of a city that has been a capital of empires for more than 1,600 years. And so we sail across the world to a harbor that represents not the rise and fall of empires, but a far more profound and ancient story of human connection to the land. The sparkling waters of Sydney Harbour are framed by one of the most iconic modern skylines on Earth, a testament to European settlement and contemporary urban life. But beneath the concrete foundations of the Opera House, under the manicured lawns of the Royal Botanic Garden, and embedded within the very walls of the city's oldest colonial buildings, lies a ghost landscape of a different kind, not a city of stone, but a cultural and spiritual map that is tens of thousands of years old. The clue to this world was not found in a grand excavation, but in a moment of quiet observation during the restoration of a simple 19th-century stone cottage. A worker noticed that one particular sandstone block in the foundation looked different from the others. Its surface wasn't just rough-hewn, it was deliberately and intricately carved with a series of concentric circles, sinuous lines, and the unmistakable outline of a kangaroo. These were Aboriginal engravings, sacred motifs that held deep spiritual significance for the local Gadigal people of the Era Nation. This block was not quarry stone. It was a piece of a dreaming site, a sacred canvas that had been violently ripped from its original location and unceremoniously used as common building material. This single, sorrowful stone tells a devastating story of erasure. When the first fleet arrived in 1788, they did not see a landscape managed and cherished for millennia by a sophisticated culture. They saw terra nullius, nobody's land. The sandstone ridges around the harbor were not barren rock to the Gadigal people. They were libraries of lore, history, and spirituality, etched with stories that connected them to the creation of the world. As the colony expanded, these sacred sites were seen as obstacles to progress. They were dynamited for building stone, quarried for road base, and deliberately vandalized to erase the symbols of the culture the settlers sought to displace. That one engraved block, built into a settler's cottage, is a stark physical metaphor for colonialism itself, a new society literally constructing its future upon the shattered fragments of a world it was actively destroying, often completely blind to the profound meaning of the materials they were using. Yet, just like the stones in Rome or Jerusalem, this discarded artifact became a powerful guide for modern archaeologists and, more importantly, for Aboriginal elders and knowledge holders. This stone and others like it have acted as crucial waypoints, helping to retrace the ghostly contours of the pre-colonial landscape. By mapping where these engraved stones were found reused in colonial walls, researchers could work backwards, like following a trail of breadcrumbs, to pinpoint the original outcrops and sheltered areas from which they were taken. This has led to the incredible rediscovery of what was lost. In secluded, overlooked corners of the sprawling metropolis, they have found the remains of massive middens, ancient mounds of shellfish remains that mark countless generations of seasonal feasting and community gathering. They have documented rock shelters whose soot-blackened ceilings whisper of families huddled around fires for thousands of years, and they have located and protected panels of rock art that had been forgotten by all but the oldest of stories. These findings are not merely archaeological curiosities, they are a radical recalibration of Australian history. They reveal Sydney not as a 250-year-old European city, but as the heart of a living, continuous culture that has thrived for over 65,000 years. This time span is almost impossible to comprehend. It means that when the Gadigal people stood on the headlands and watched the tall ships of the First Fleet sail into their harbour, they were gazing out from a country that their ancestors had known since a time when Neanderthals still walked the earth in Europe. The modern city is just the thinnest, most recent layer on a palimpsest of unparalleled human depth. The ghost landscape of Sydney is a testament to this breathtaking longevity, a world of story, lore, and connection that is not entirely lost but merely waiting to be seen and acknowledged. This brings us to a crucial and humbling point in our global journey. The ghost cities we have explored from Rome to Cambodia are awe-inspiring because they speak to us in a language we understand, the language of monumental architecture, of kings and empires, of written histories and fallen capitals. But the story from Sydney reminds us with powerful clarity that a ghost city does not require towering pyramids or grand forums. A ghost city can be a cultural landscape, a living network of sacred sites, hunting grounds, song lines, and meeting places that is every bit as complex and significant as any walled metropolis. The destruction of these landscapes through colonialism, development, and neglect represents the loss of a different kind of city, one built not of stone but of knowledge, story, and an intimate, sacred relationship with the land itself. The engraved sandstone block in the colonial wall is a poignant message from this other kind of ghost city, a silent witness to a world that was not abandoned to time, but was actively overwritten, a powerful reminder that the deepest layers of human history are often the most fragile, and their rediscovery requires us to listen not just for the echoes of kings, but for the whispers of country. Now let's travel to the City of Light, where the grandeur of Paris seems to define French history itself. But beneath the wide boulevards created by Baron horsemen in the 19th century, and under the shadow of its iconic Gothic cathedrals, lies a far older, darker, and more mysterious city. The clue to this hidden world was found not in a dig site, but high up on the soaring walls of the Sainte-Chapelle, that breathtaking jewel of Gothic architecture built to house the relics of Christ's Passion. During restoration work, a stonemason noticed something unusual about one of the limestone blocks supporting the delicate stained glass windows. While the surrounding stones were plain, this one bore the faint but unmistakable traces of carved decoration. Not the intricate foliage and biblical scenes of the Gothic era, but something far more archaic. The style was crude, almost primitive, featuring interlocking spirals and simple crosses that art historians immediately recognized as Merovingian, dating back to the 6th or 7th century. This was the art of the long-haired kings, the first dynasty of Frankish rulers who succeeded the Roman Empire in Gaul. This single block of stone was a historical anomaly. It had no place in a 13th century Gothic chapel. The only explanation was that it was spolia, a piece of an older, ruined Merovingian church that had been quarried by the medieval builders and repurposed as simple filler in the new, glorious construction. For the Gothic masons, it was just a handy piece of rock, but for archaeologists, it was a message in stone, a direct line to a Paris that had been almost completely forgotten. It pointed emphatically to the Isle de la Cité, the ancient heart of the city, and suggested that long before the Gothic spires reached for the heavens, this island was already a sacred Christian center, its earliest churches buried under centuries of later construction. Guided by this clue, excavations began in the most logical place, directly beneath the great monuments themselves. The most stunning revelations came from the crypt beneath the square in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. Here, archaeologists didn't just find a few old foundations. They peeled back the layers of the city like the pages of a history book. At the very bottom, they found the straight, orderly streets and the underfloor heating systems of Roman Lutetia, a prosperous provincial town. But built directly on top of this Roman grid was something far more significant, a vast early Christian necropolis, a city of the dead. They uncovered hundreds of Merovingian-era stone sarcophagi, arranged in orderly rows, many of them carved with those same simple crosses found on the stone in Sainte-Chapelle. This was not a haphazard burial ground. It was a carefully planned cemetery surrounding the first great Christian basilica of Paris, a church that had vanished so completely its very existence was only a rumor in historical texts. This ghost city beneath the Isle de la Cité reveals the dramatic transformation of Paris from a dying Roman outpost into the thriving nucleus of Frankish power. As the Roman Empire crumbled in the west, its cities shrank and retreated behind dwindling walls. The sprawling Roman town of Lutetia on the left bank was largely abandoned. The center of life, power, and religion contracted to the easily defensible Isle de la Cité. The Merovingian kings, led by Clovis I, who converted to Christianity and made Paris his capital, chose this island as their base. They didn't build on empty land. They constructed their palaces and their most important churches directly atop the ruins of the Roman governor's palace and the temples of the old gods. They were consciously creating a new Christian capital, physically and symbolically building their new order upon the foundations of the collapsed Roman world. The discoveries in the crypt show a society in transition, a blend of Roman tradition and new Frankish culture. The stone sarcophagi were carved by craftsmen using Roman techniques, but the bodies inside were buried with grave goods typical of Frankish warriors' iron spearheads, belt buckles, and glass beads. This was the world that would eventually give rise to the Carolingian dynasty, and later to the Capetian kings who would build the Gothic Paris we recognize today. Each successive wave of construction, Romanesque churches replacing Merovingian basilicas, and later Gothic cathedrals replacing Romanesque ones, involved the same process. The old structures were dismantled, their stones were hauled away to be reused in new foundations and walls, and the ground level was gradually raised, burying the past literally underfoot. The Merovingian ghost city wasn't destroyed. It was simply entombed, its memory fading until all that was left were a few scattered stones hidden in the walls of its magnificent successors, waiting for centuries for someone to notice their strange, ancient carvings and ask what story they had to tell. Our journey now takes us to the very crossroads of the ancient world, to the fabled city of Samarkand in Uzbekistan. For centuries, its name has been synonymous with the romance of the Silk Road, a place of glittering turquoise domes and bustling markets where the caravans of East and West met. The magnificent Timurid architecture of the 14th and 15th centuries, built by the conqueror Tamerlane and his descendants, defines the city's skyline and seems to tell its entire story. But as with so many of the world's great metropolises, the most visible layer is merely the final chapter. The discovery of a single, broken terracotta brick would prove that the true heart of Samarkand beats much deeper, in a ghost city of a completely different faith and culture, buried directly beneath the Islamic splendor. This crucial clue was uncovered not in a grand excavation, but during a careful restoration of the Gur-Iamir mausoleum, the final resting place of Tamerlane himself. High up on one of the structure's immense walls, a conservator noticed a brick that was clearly out of place. It was older, of a different clay composition and firing technique than the Timurid bricks surrounding it. And most importantly, its surface was inscribed not with the elegant Arabic script of the Quran, but with the flowing, cursive characters of the Sogdian language. This was a profound anachronism. The Sogdians were an ancient Iranian people, the master merchants and facilitators of the Silk Road, whose power and influence had faded centuries before Tamerlane was even born. This brick was not original to his mausoleum. It was spolia, a piece of a much older world, looted from a ruined Sogdian structure and used as simple, pragmatic filler in the new construction. The inscription on that brick provided the essential clue. It wasn't a random mark, it was a foundation inscription, the kind used to dedicate and sanctify an important building. The language and style pointed to its origin in a Zoroastrian fire temple or perhaps a Buddhist monastery, both religions that had flourished in Sogdiana before the arrival of Islam in the 8th century. For the Timurid builders, this inscribed brick was meaningless, just a conveniently shaped piece of hard clay, but for archaeologists it was a priceless treasure map. It was a direct signal that when Tamerlane's architects surveyed the land to build his glorious capital, they weren't looking at an empty plot. They were standing atop the rubble of a once great Sogdian city, and they were using the bones of that vanquished civilization as the foundation for their own. Guided by this evidence, excavations began to focus on the areas beneath and around the Timurid monuments. The results were staggering. Using a combination of targeted digging and ground-penetrating radar, archaeologists began to map out the outlines of a vast pre-Islamic Samarkand, known in antiquity as Samarkand. They uncovered the foundations of Zoroastrian fire temples, with their distinctive architectural layout designed around a sacred eternal flame. Even more surprising were the discoveries pointing to a strong Buddhist presence. They found the remnants of stupas, dome-shaped shrines used for meditation, and fragments of statues depicting the Buddha himself, all dating back to the 5th and 6th centuries CE. This revealed a Samarkand that was not a monolithic Zoroastrian stronghold, but a truly cosmopolitan religious melting pot, where Persian, Indian, and Central Asian spiritual traditions met and mingled freely, facilitated by the constant flow of people and ideas along the Silk Road. This ghost city forces us to completely reimagine the spiritual and cultural landscape of ancient Central Asia. For centuries, the Sogdians have been portrayed primarily as cunning merchants, the middlemen of the Silk Road. But the discoveries beneath Samarkand show they were far more than that. They were sophisticated city builders with a complex and diverse religious life. A Sogdian merchant traveling from his home in Samarkand to the Chinese capital of Chang'an would have prayed at a Zoroastrian temple before his journey, stayed at Buddhist monastic caravanserais along the way, and done business with Manichaean and Nestorian Christian traders, all while speaking a language that served as the lingua franca of the entire Silk Road. Their city was the ultimate international hub, a place where a dizzying array of cultures, languages, and faiths coexisted and cross-pollinated. The rise of Islam and later the conquests of Tamerlane did not erase this history. They built upon it both literally and figuratively. Tamerlane, in particular, was a master of symbolic appropriation. By constructing his magnificent capital with its breathtaking mosques and mausoleums directly on top of the Sogdian ruins, he was making a powerful statement. He was physically anchoring his new Islamic empire to the deep commercial and cultural legacy of the Silk Road. He was declaring himself the heir to that tradition of world-spanning power and luxury, even as he built his monuments with the very stones of the civilizations that had pioneered it. The glories of Islamic Samarkand were not a spontaneous creation. They were the magnificent final layer in a cultural millefeuille that had been stacking for over 1,000 years. That one discarded Sogdian brick is a perfect symbol of this continuous process, a silent witness to the endless cycle of conquest, absorption, and renewal that defines the history of the crossroads of the world, where every new empire rises by standing on the shoulders of the traders, monks, and builders who came before. From Rome's Palatine Hill to the jungles of Cambodia at Angkor Wat, these 22 humble stones have been our guides to entire worlds we never knew existed. They've shown us that the history we thought we knew is often just the final chapter of a much longer, richer story. These discarded foundation stones are far more than ancient rubble. They are silent messengers from lost civilizations, patiently waiting for centuries for someone to notice their faint inscriptions and understand their profound significance. They remind us that our past is not a simple, linear timeline but a complex, layered tapestry where empires rise upon the bones of their predecessors, each generation writing its story over the last, often unaware of the forgotten cities lying just beneath their feet. This journey through time reveals a universal pattern of human civilization. We are constant builders and recyclers, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the Inca emperors of Peru, from the kings of Mesopotamia to the merchant princes of the Silk Road. Every culture has looked upon the ruins of those who came before and seen not just rubble but opportunity. They reused stones, they leveled old foundations, and they built their new dreams directly atop the achievements of the past. Sometimes this was an act of conquest, a symbolic erasure of a defeated enemy. Other times it was an act of reverence, a way to connect their new project to the sacred power of an ancient site. But always it was an act of practicality, using what was already there. In doing so, they accidentally created the most incredible time capsules imaginable, preserving the memory of ghost cities that would one day rewrite our history books. The most thrilling part of this story is that it is far from over. For every one of these 22 stones that has been found and decoded, there are undoubtedly hundreds more still hidden, waiting to be discovered. Modern technology like LiDAR radar scanning is allowing us to peer beneath the jungle canopy without even lifting a shovel, revealing the ghostly outlines of vast urban grids we never knew existed. Ground-penetrating radar can map buried streets and buildings hidden deep below modern city centers. Each new tool gives us a fresh way to listen to the whispers of the past. Who knows what we will find next? Perhaps a reused stone in the walls of the Great Wall of China will point to a lost prehistoric kingdom. Maybe a block in the foundations of a London church will reveal a sprawling Roman city beneath the streets. The next great discovery could be waiting in plain sight, disguised as just another rock in a wall, its secret message overlooked for 1,000 years. This is why archaeology is so much more than just a study of the dead past. It is a dynamic, ongoing detective story. Each of these stones is a clue, and each ghost city is a cold case finally being solved. They challenge our assumptions, humble our modern arrogance, and connect us to the long, unbroken chain of human ambition, creativity, and resilience. They show us that while empires may fall and cities may be buried, the human impulse to build, to create, and to leave a mark is eternal. So the next time you walk through a historic city or gaze upon an ancient ruin, remember to look a little closer. That ordinary-looking stone in the wall beside you might not be ordinary at all. It might be a key waiting for the right person to turn it and unlock the door to a whole new world. What hidden history would you want to uncover next? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey through the layers of time, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more explorations into history's greatest